Prophecies are dangerous things. They promise clarity, but deliver only questions. They speak of destiny while ignoring choice. And sometimes they place the weight of the galaxy on shoulders never meant to bear it. The ancient Jedi mystic spoke of one who would bring balance to the Force, born of no father, conceived by the will of the Force itself. For generations, the Jedi Council waited and watched for this prophesied savior. When they found Anakin Skywalker on the desert world of Tatooine, they believed their patience had been rewarded. A boy with over 20,000 midichlorians per cell, born without a father, powerful beyond measure. Surely this was the chosen one. But what if they were looking in the wrong place? What if the Force, in its infinite complexity, had already planted the seeds of balance elsewhere? What if the warrior destined to destroy the Sith and restore equilibrium to the galaxy was not a slave boy from Tatooine, but a Zabrak child from Dathomir? What if Darth Maul was the chosen one? This is not the story you know. This is not the tale of Anakin Skywalker's rise and fall and redemption. This is something darker, more complex, and perhaps more fitting for a universe where the line between light and dark has never been as clear as the Jedi would prefer. This is the story of how the most fearsome Sith apprentice in a generation became the very thing his master feared most. Not because he chose the light, but because he embraced something far more dangerous than either extreme: balance. Maul's true origins, born of the Force on the shadowy world of Dathomir, where the Force flowed through ancient magics and twisted rituals. Mother Talzin ruled the Night Sisters with an iron will and mastery of the dark side that rivaled any Sith. Among her clan of Night Brothers were 3 sons: Feral, Savage Opress, and a 3rd child whose birth defied explanation. The youngest had no father. Talzin knew this with certainty because she had been alone when she conceived him, meditating deep in the crimson mists of Dathomir's most sacred groves. The Force itself had granted her this child. She felt it the moment he quickened in her womb, a presence unlike anything she had ever encountered. When the boy was born under a moonless sky, his eyes blazed with an intensity that spoke of something far greater than mere Nightbrother heritage. Talzin named him Maul, not for his future as a weapon, but for the way his very existence seemed to tear at the fabric of destiny itself. As the child grew, Talzin began to understand the magnitude of what the Force had done. She performed the ancient blood tests, measuring the microscopic organisms that allowed Force wielders to channel their power. The results should have been impossible: 22,000 midichlorians per cell, higher than any being she had ever encountered or read about in the forbidden texts she had stolen from traveling Jedi over the years. This was not just a Force-sensitive child. This was something the galaxy had been waiting for. Though Talzin did not yet understand what, the boy displayed powers that no child should possess. At 3 years old, he could already move objects with his mind, not clumsily as young Force-sensitives do, but with precision and control that suggested an innate understanding of the Force's currents. By 5, he had mastered rudimentary Night Sister magic, without formal training, as if the knowledge was already present in his blood, waiting to be awakened. And his eyes, those burning yellow eyes, seemed to see things others could not. Past and future, light and dark, life and death, all swirled together in his gaze. Mother Talzin knew that such power would not go unnoticed forever. She was right to worry. Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith who moved in secret through the Republic as Senator Palpatine of Naboo, had long been interested in Dathomir's dark magics. He came to the planet seeking to expand his knowledge of the dark side, to learn techniques the Sith had forgotten in their centuries of hiding. Talzin welcomed him, hoping to leverage his knowledge for her own advancement. She had dreams of becoming his apprentice, of leaving Dathomir behind to shape the galaxy itself. But when Sidious encountered young Maul during one of his visits, everything changed. The Sith Lord, who had studied the prophecies extensively in his quest for ultimate power, recognized immediately what the child represented. The Force signature was unmistakable. Born of no father, conceived by the Force itself, power beyond measure. This was the chosen one the Jedi had been waiting for, and he was here, on Dathomir, in the care of a witch who had no understanding of what the prophecy truly meant. Sidious made his decision in an instant. If the Chosen One was destined to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force, then the best way to prevent that outcome was to ensure the Chosen One became Sith himself. He would take the boy, train him in the ways of the dark side, and twist the prophecy to serve his own ends. Where the Force intended balance, he would cultivate pure darkness. Where destiny promised the Sith's destruction, he would forge an instrument of their ultimate victory. The abduction happened on a night when Dathomir's moons hid behind clouds thick as blood. Sidious used his considerable power to cloud the minds of the Night Sisters, to make them forget the boy's existence. Even Talzin, powerful as she was, found her memories of her youngest son fading like smoke. She knew she had given birth to 3 boys, but could only recall 2 names: Feral, Savage, and there had been another, hadn't there? But the details slipped away whenever she tried to grasp them. Only in her dreams did she remember the child with burning eyes, and even then the memory dissolved upon waking. Sidious took young Maul to his secret training facility on Mustafar, a world of lava and ash where the dark side pooled like toxic water. There, isolated from all other life, the real work would begin. Not just training an apprentice, but attempting to corrupt destiny itself. Early training, forging the perfect weapon. The training of Darth Maul began the moment Sidious's ship entered Mustafar's atmosphere. The boy was perhaps 6 years old, torn from everything he had known, thrust into a world of fire and shadow. For any other child, it would have been traumatic enough to break their spirit entirely. But Maul was not any other child. He was the Chosen One, and the Force itself sustained him, even as Sidious worked to twist him into something dark and terrible. Sidious's approach to training Maul differed significantly from how he had been taught by his own master, Darth Plagueis. Where Plagueis had focused on intellectual understanding of the Force, on manipulation and subtlety, Sidious pushed Maul toward pure physical and combative excellence. He reasoned that if the boy's destiny was to bring balance through destruction of the Sith, then making him too powerful to ever be defeated would subvert that destiny. Maul would become the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever seen. An unstoppable force of dark side power that even the prophecy could not overcome. The training regime was inhuman. Each day before the sun rose over Mustafar's lava fields, Maul would run 20 kilometers through the volcanic terrain, dodging geysers of flame and toxic gas vents. Sidious used the Force to hurl debris at the boy, testing his reflexes and his ability to sense danger before it manifested. Any injury Maul sustained would not be healed with medical technology. Instead, Sidious would teach him to use the Force to accelerate his own healing, to draw on his pain and channel it into power. By the time he was 8 years old, Maul had mastered form-Y lightsaber combat, known as Shicho. The basic form came to him with supernatural ease, as if his body already knew the movements before his mind could process them. Sidious recognized this as evidence of the prophecy at work. The Force itself was preparing Maul for his destiny, teaching him through instinct and intuition what would take normal students years to learn. But Sidious would not allow the Force to guide his apprentice toward balance. Every lesson was twisted to emphasize aggression over defense, power over restraint, hatred over peace. When Maul completed a training sequence perfectly, Sidious would punish him anyway, to teach him that mercy was weakness. When Maul failed, the punishment doubled. Pain became the boy's constant companion, and in that pain, Sidious cultivated an ocean of rage. Yet something unexpected was happening. As Maul's power grew, so did his awareness. His connection to the Force was too strong to be fully dominated by Sidious's teachings. In his meditations, forced to kneel for hours in the volcanic heat, Maul would feel the Force flowing through him in ways that contradicted everything his master taught. He sensed not just the dark side, but something else. A balance, a harmony that seemed to call to him from somewhere far away. He learned to hide these moments from Sidious, to present only the rage and hatred his master expected, while keeping a small part of himself separate and secret. By 10 years old, Maul had mastered not only Shicho but also Makashi, the elegant dueling form, and Soresu, the defensive form. Sidious pushed him harder, driving him to learn Ataru, the acrobatic form that would suit his Zabrak physiology perfectly. Maul took to it like a natural, his movements becoming so fluid and fast that even Sidious had difficulty following them with the naked eye. The boy was becoming something extraordinary, a warrior beyond anything the Sith had produced in 1,000 years. When Maul was 12, Sidious introduced him to Juyo, the most aggressive and dangerous lightsaber form. Also called the ferocity form, Juyo was a style that channeled pure emotion and rage into devastating attacks. It was considered dangerous even to learn, as it brought the practitioner to the very edge of sanity, balancing on the knife's edge between controlled fury and complete madness. Many Jedi who had attempted to master Juyo had fallen to the dark side. For a Sith apprentice who was already being trained in the ways of darkness, learning Juyo should have pushed Maul beyond redemption. Instead, something remarkable happened. As Maul practiced Juyo, channeling his rage and pain into the brutal movements, he found within himself an unexpected calm at the center of the storm. It was as if the Force was teaching him that extreme emotion could coexist with perfect clarity, that one did not have to choose between feeling everything and feeling nothing. This paradox would shape Maul's understanding of the Force in ways Sidious never intended. Sidious also trained Maul in Force abilities that went far beyond standard Sith teachings. He taught him Force Scream, a power that could shatter the minds of weaker beings. He showed him how to use the Force to cloud minds, to make himself invisible to both physical sight and Force sense. He instructed him in Meku Daru, the rare ability to interface with and control machines through the Force. And he trained him in the art of Sith alchemy, teaching him to corrupt and twist living things to serve the dark side. But there were limits to what Sidious would teach. He never showed Maul Force lightning, fearing that such a power in the hands of the Chosen One might one day be turned against him. He never revealed the deepest secrets of Sith sorcery, the rituals that Plagueis had taught him for manipulating life and death itself. Some knowledge was too dangerous to share, even with an apprentice being groomed for ultimate power. As the years passed, Maul grew into a weapon of terrifying capability. By 15, he could best most Jedi Masters in single combat. His double-bladed lightsaber, a weapon of his own design inspired by ancient Sith texts, became an extension of his body. He could fight multiple opponents simultaneously, his blade a crimson blur that seemed to be everywhere at once. His Force abilities had expanded to include powerful telekinesis, the ability to sense events across vast distances, and a form of battle meditation that allowed him to coordinate attacks with inhuman precision. Yet beneath it all, that spark of awareness remained. In the quiet moments between training sessions, when Sidious was away plotting his grand schemes, Maul would meditate and touch that place within himself where the Force flowed pure and untainted. He did not understand what it meant. He did not know about the prophecy or his true destiny. But he knew that what Sidious taught him was not the complete truth about the Force. There was something more, something that balanced the hatred and pain with purpose and meaning. That knowledge would save him, but not yet. First, he would have to face his baptism in blood, his first true mission as Darth Maul, apprentice to Darth Sidious, and that mission would take him to Naboo. The Battle of Naboo reimagined. The Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo proceeded exactly as in our familiar timeline. Darth Sidious, manipulating both sides of the conflict, sent Newt Gunray and his Neimoidian allies to invade the peaceful planet. The Jedi Council dispatched Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi to negotiate, and when negotiations failed, the Jedi fled with Queen Amidala, eventually landing on Tatooine for repairs. But this time, when Sidious sent his apprentice to deal with the Jedi, he sent something far more dangerous than a merely skilled assassin. He sent the Chosen One. Maul tracked the Jedi to Tatooine with ease, his connection to the Force allowing him to sense Qui-Gon's presence from orbit. As his Sith infiltrator descended toward Mos Espa, he felt something else too. Another Force presence, powerful and pure, like a beacon in the desert night. For a moment, he was distracted from his mission, drawn toward that distant light. But discipline reasserted itself. Sidious had commanded him to eliminate the Jedi. Everything else was secondary. The confrontation outside Mos Espa happened much as it did in our timeline. Qui-Gon sensed Maul's approach and drew his lightsaber, but this time when they clashed, the difference was immediately apparent. Qui-Gon was a master of Form 4, a Taru known for his acrobatic and aggressive style. He was considered one of the greatest duelists in the Jedi Order. Against the Maul of our timeline, he had held his own, even pushing the Sith apprentice back at times. Against this Maul, the Chosen One, trained to perfection in every form, Qui-Gon lasted perhaps 30 seconds before he realized he was hopelessly outmatched. Maul's blade moved with a speed and precision that seemed supernatural because it was. The Force guided his every motion, anticipating Qui-Gon's attacks before the Jedi Master could fully form the thought to execute them. When Qui-Gon attacked high, Maul's blade was already low. When he feinted left, Maul had moved right. It was as if they were dancing to a song only Maul could hear, and Qui-Gon was always one step behind. The Jedi Master quickly switched tactics, relying on his knowledge of Form 6 Niemann to confuse his opponent with unpredictable strikes blended with Force pushes. But Maul knew Niemann as well, had trained in it until he could fight in the style with his eyes closed. He deflected Qui-Gon's Force attacks almost casually and pressed his assault with relentless efficiency. Qui-Gon realized with cold certainty that he could not win this fight. His only hope was to delay long enough for the Queen's ship to escape and for Obi-Wan to come to his aid. He drew on all his experience, all his decades of training, and fought with the desperate skill of a man who knows death is approaching but refuses to yield. Maul, for his part, felt something unexpected stirring within him. This Jedi Master, facing certain death, fought not with fear, but with serene acceptance and unwavering purpose.
There was no hatred in him, no anger, only a deep commitment to protecting others.
It was the first time Maul had encountered such purity of purpose, and it unsettled him. For just a moment, his assault faltered, his blade hesitating mid-strike. Qui-Gon sensed the opening and lunged forward, his green blade seeking Maul's heart. But the moment of hesitation passed in an instant, and Maul's instincts, honed by years of brutal training, reasserted themselves. He sidestepped the lunge with supernatural grace and brought his double blade around in a horizontal arc that should have bisected the Jedi Master at the waist. At the last possible second, Qui-Gon threw himself backward, the Force lending him speed he didn't know he possessed. Maul's blade scored a deep gash across his chest instead of cutting him in half, but the wound was still mortal. As Qui-Gon collapsed to the sand, blood staining the desert floor, the Queen's ship finally achieved liftoff and shot into the sky. Maul should have pursued. His mission was to eliminate the Jedi, and only one was down. But instead, he deactivated his lightsaber and knelt beside the dying Jedi Master. He did not know why he did this. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was that stirring of something within him that Sidious had failed to fully eradicate. Or perhaps it was the Force itself, using this moment to begin awakening the Chosen One to his true purpose. Qui-Gon looked up at his killer with eyes that held no hatred, only sadness. He tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth, making the words impossible. But his thoughts were clear in the Force, and Maul, with his extraordinary connection, heard them as clearly as if spoken aloud. Not for himself, for the boy. Find the boy. He is the Chosen One. Save him from the darkness. Then Qui-Gon Jinn died, his final thoughts echoing in Maul's mind. The boy, the Chosen One. The word struck something deep within Maul, a chord that resonated with that hidden place where the Force flowed pure. For the first time in his life, Maul questioned what he was doing. And why? If there was another Chosen One, what did that make him? And what darkness had Qui-Gon been trying to save this boy from? The Sith? Or something else? But there was no time for contemplation. Another presence approached rapidly, fierce and desperate. Obi-Wan Kenobi had felt his master die through their training bond and was racing across the desert toward them, rage and grief fueling his speed. Maul rose smoothly to his feet, his blade igniting once more. He would finish what he started. Then perhaps he would seek out this boy Qui-Gon had mentioned and discover the truth about this prophecy he knew nothing about. The duel that followed was brief and brutal. Obi-Wan, consumed by anger at his master's death, abandoned his defensive Soresu style and attacked with pure Ataru aggression. It was a mistake. Maul, master of all forms, recognized the emotional compromise and exploited it ruthlessly. Where he had granted Qui-Gon the respect of a true duel, he showed Obi-Wan no such courtesy. This was an execution. Within 10 seconds, Maul had disarmed the young Padawan, sending his lightsaber spinning into the sand. Within 20, he had Obi-Wan on his knees, one blade of his saber staff pressed against the Jedi's throat. The young man looked up at him with eyes full of defiant rage, waiting for the killing blow. But Maul hesitated again. He saw in Obi-Wan something of himself, a young student trained by a master, devoted to a cause he did not fully understand. And he remembered Qui-Gon's final thoughts. Not for himself, for the boy? This Padawan had been devoted to his master, was grieving his loss with an intensity Maul had never felt for anyone. What would it mean to take that last connection away? The moment stretched. Obi-Wan closed his eyes, preparing for death. And in that moment of acceptance, Maul felt something shift in the Force. It was as if a door had opened somewhere far away, and through it he glimpsed 1,000 possible futures. In some, he killed this Jedi and went on to serve Sidious faithfully. In others, he spared him and everything changed. The futures were unclear, fragmented, but one truth emerged from the chaos. This choice mattered, not just for Obi-Wan Kenobi, but for the galaxy itself. Maul deactivated his lightsaber and stepped back. Obi-Wan's eyes snapped open in shock. "Why?" the Padawan demanded, his voice raw with confusion and grief. Maul said nothing. He had no answer that would make sense, even to himself. Instead, he turned and walked toward his ship, leaving the young Jedi kneeling in the sand beside his master's body. As he ascended the boarding ramp, he heard Obi-Wan calling after him, demanding answers, but Maul had none to give. All he knew was that something had changed within him, and there was no going back. On the flight to Naboo, Maul meditated deeply, searching for understanding. The Force showed him fragments, pieces of a puzzle he could not yet assemble. He saw a boy on Tatooine, pure and powerful and innocent. He saw darkness rising, consuming everything in its path. He saw himself standing at a crossroads, with one path leading to devastation and the other two he could not see. The vision ended before revealing what lay down that second path. When he landed on Naboo and reported to Sidious, Maul did not mention sparing Obi-Wan.
He claimed the Padawan had fled before he could finish him.
Sidious was displeased but not suspicious. After all, eliminating the Master had been the primary objective, and Qui-Gon Jinn was certainly dead. The matter was closed, but for Maul, everything was just beginning to open. The Battle of Naboo's conclusion differed significantly from our timeline. With Qui-Gon dead but Obi-Wan alive to testify to the existence of the Sith, the Jedi Council faced a terrible truth they had denied for a millennium. The Sith had returned. And they had sent an apprentice of extraordinary power to do their bidding. Obi-Wan's description of the tattooed Zabrak, who had killed his master with contemptuous ease, sent ripples of concern through the council. Master Yoda, ancient and wise, felt a disturbance in the Force unlike any he had encountered in his 900 years. This was not merely a skilled darksider. This was something more, something that resonated with prophecies he had studied but never fully understood. He ordered the council to research every prophecy in the Jedi archives, seeking any mention of a dark warrior who could bring about galactic change. What they found troubled them greatly. Several ancient texts spoke of the Chosen One in terms more ambiguous than the version the Jedi had popularized. These older prophecies did not specify that the Chosen One would be raised as a Jedi or even fight on the side of light. They spoke only of balance and the destruction of the Sith. Some of the most ancient texts even suggested that the Chosen One might emerge from darkness itself, that the Force could work through shadows as easily as through light. Master Mace Windu dismissed these interpretations as Sith corruption of the true prophecy. Master Yoda was not so certain. He had felt the presence on Naboo through the Force, distant but powerful, and what he had sensed was not simple darkness. It was complexity, contradiction, potential. Troubled, he kept his own counsel and waited to see what would unfold. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, in the shadows of the Senate building, Darth Sidious confronted his apprentice about what he had felt during the Naboo mission. Maul's performance had been flawless, yet Sidious, with his mastery of the dark side, sensed something had shifted in his weapon. There was a hesitation that had not been present before, a questioning that threatened the absolute obedience he demanded. "You felt something on Tatooine," Sidious said, his voice soft and dangerous, "when you encountered the Jedi Master. What was it?" Maul considered lying, but knew his master would sense deception. Instead, he chose a truth that served his purposes. The Jedi spoke of a chosen one, Master, a boy on Tatooine with unprecedented power. His final thoughts were of protecting this child from darkness. This was calculated to distract Sidious from examining Maul's own doubts, and it worked. The Sith Lord's eyes narrowed with interest. A child with power? Did you sense this presence yourself? Maul nodded. Briefly, Master. Strong in the Force, untrained, the Jedi believed him to be the prophesied one who would bring balance. Sidious was silent for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities. If there truly was another candidate for the role of Chosen One, it represented both a threat and an opportunity. A threat because any being prophesied to destroy the Sith was dangerous. An opportunity because if such a child could be turned, corrupted, broken, then the prophecy itself could be subverted.
"Find this child," Sidious commanded. "Bring him to me."
If the Jedi believe him to be their savior, he will instead become their doom. Maul bowed and departed, hiding the turmoil within him. He had succeeded in deflecting his master's attention, but at what cost? Now he would have to track down the boy Qui-Gon had died trying to protect and deliver him into Sidious's hands. The thought troubled him in ways he could not fully articulate, but he was still his master's apprentice, still bound by decades of conditioning and training. He would obey, for now. The Clone Wars, a conflicted chosen one, the discovery and acquisition of Anakin Skywalker happened swiftly. Maul returned to Tatooine and found the boy still enslaved to Watto the Toydarian. Using the Force to cloud minds and manipulate circumstances, Maul arranged for the boy's freedom without Watto even realizing he had agreed to it. Anakin, 9 years old and confused by the sudden change in his fortunes, found himself face to face with a crimson-skinned Zabrak whose eyes held depths of darkness and pain. "Who are you?" the boy asked with the innocent directness of childhood. "I am Maul," came the reply. And then, after a moment's hesitation, "I am here to take you away from this place." Anakin should have been frightened. This stranger radiated danger, his very presence making the air feel heavy and charged. But the boy had spent his entire life as a slave, had developed instincts for reading people and situations, and what he sensed from this Zabrak was not malice directed at him, but rather a deep, fundamental conflict, light and dark warring within a single being. "Are you a Jedi?" Anakin asked hopefully. "No, I am something else." The journey to Coruscant was strange for both of them. Maul found himself drawn to the boy's innate goodness and his pure connection to the Force. Anakin possessed that rare quality of seeing the best in everyone, of believing that freedom and justice were not just possible, but inevitable. It was alien to everything Maul had been taught, yet it resonated with that hidden part of himself that Sidious had never quite managed to destroy. For his part, Anakin sensed that Maul was not evil, just wounded. The boy had a gift for healing, though he did not yet know it, and he unconsciously reached out to this scarred warrior through the Force, offering wordless comfort. Maul did not reject it, though he knew he should. Instead, he allowed the boy's light to touch him, and in doing so, he felt something he had not experienced in over a decade: hope. When they arrived on Coruscant and Maul delivered Anakin to Sidious, the Sith Lord immediately sensed the boy's potential. Here was a child more naturally powerful than even Maul, untainted by training, a blank slate upon which the Sith could write their darkest lessons. Sidious smiled, an expression that made Anakin take an instinctive step backward. "Magnificent," Sidious breathed. "Lord Maul, you have done well. This child will be the key to our ultimate victory over the Jedi." But then Sidious made a mistake. He had grown so accustomed to Maul's obedience, so confident in the programming he had instilled, that he did not sense the change happening within his apprentice. He assumed Maul would accept without question when he announced his intentions. "I will train the boy myself," Sidious declared. "You will remain my apprentice for now, but soon this child will replace you. The rule of two demands it." Those words, spoken so casually, triggered something in Maul. For the first time since his abduction from Dathomir, he felt pure, burning rage directed not at some distant enemy or abstract concept, but at his master. All those years of service, of pain and suffering, and perfect obedience, and he was to be discarded for this boy? More than that, this innocent child was to be subjected to the same torment that had shaped Maul's entire existence? No, the thought came unbidden, but with absolute clarity. No, he would not allow it. Not to Anakin, not to anyone. In that moment, something fundamental broke within Darth Maul. The conditioning that had held him for so long simply shattered like glass struck by a hammer. And in the space it left behind, the Force itself surged in, wild and powerful and infinitely complex. Light and dark, order and chaos, the living Force and the cosmic Force, all of it flooded through him simultaneously. And for the first time in his life, Maul understood what he truly was. He was the chosen one, not Anakin Skywalker. The Force had created him for this purpose, had guided him to this moment, and his purpose was not to serve the Sith or the Jedi, but to bring balance by destroying the imbalance that both extremes represented. Sidious sensed the change immediately. His apprentice's presence in the Force had suddenly shifted, expanding and deepening in ways that should not be possible. The Sith Lord reached for his lightsaber, but he was too slow. Maul, moving with speed enhanced by his newfound clarity, ignited his double blade and positioned himself between Sidious and Anakin. "No," Maul said simply. "I will not let you corrupt another child. I will not be your weapon any longer." Sidious's face twisted with rage. "You dare defy me? I made you what you are. Without me, you are nothing." "You made me your slave," Maul replied, his voice calm despite the war raging in his heart. "But the Force made me something greater, and I will not let you pervert the Force's will any longer."
The duel that followed was brief but catastrophic.
These were not merely two Force users fighting, but two philosophies colliding. Sidious attacked with the full fury of the dark side, channeling decades of hatred and ambition into attacks meant to overwhelm and destroy. Maul defended not with darkness alone, but with something new, a synthesis of light and dark that had never been attempted before. He drew on his rage, yes, but also on his compassion for Anakin. He used his hatred of slavery, but balanced it with his desire for freedom. Every dark emotion was counterweighted by a light one, creating a harmony that multiplied his power beyond what either side alone could provide. Sidious, confronted with this unprecedented display, found himself pushed back step by step. But the Sith Lord was not to be underestimated. With a gesture, he brought down a section of the ceiling, forcing Maul to divide his attention between defense and protecting Anakin. In that moment of distraction, Sidious unleashed his most devastating weapon. Lightning arced from his fingers, not the relatively restrained bolts he would later use against Jedi, but pure, concentrated, dark side energy meant to annihilate. Maul caught the lightning on his lightsaber, but the force of it drove him to his knees. Sidious pressed his advantage, pouring more power into the attack, laughing as his former apprentice struggled to maintain his defense. Young Anakin, cowering behind a pillar, watched in horror as the Zabrak who had promised to save him began to falter. Then the boy did something extraordinary. Without training, without understanding, operating purely on instinct and compassion, Anakin reached out with the Force. He did not attack Sidious or try to block the lightning. Instead, he touched Maul through the Force, lending him his strength, his hope, his unshakable belief that good would triumph over evil. The effect was instantaneous. Maul's power surged as Anakin's light merged with his shadow, creating a balance so perfect, so complete, that for a moment the Force itself seemed to sing. The lightning that had been driving Maul down was suddenly absorbed, channeled through the harmony of opposing energies and redirected back at its source. Sidious barely managed to dodge, the reflected lightning scoring the wall behind him. He stared at his former apprentice with wide eyes, finally understanding what he had created. Not a weapon, not a simple Darksider, but something the Sith had feared for 1,000 years. A true balanced Force wielder. A being who could channel both light and dark without being consumed by either. The Chosen One. "This is not over," Sidious hissed. Then, recognizing he could not win this battle, he fled, using Sith sorcery to cloud the Force and mask his escape.
Maul collapsed, exhausted beyond measure.
Anakin rushed to him, small hands trying to help support the much larger Zabrak. For a moment they simply breathed, processing what had just happened. Then Maul looked at the boy and saw tears streaming down his face, tears not of fear but of relief. "Thank you," Maul whispered. "Thank you for showing me what I truly am." From that day forward, everything changed. Maul could not return to Sidious, and he dared not approach the Jedi, who would see only a Sith apprentice. Instead, he did something that had never been attempted in 1,000 years of galactic history. He became a rogue Force wielder, dedicated neither to light nor dark, but to the balance between them. He took Anakin under his protection, not as master and apprentice in the traditional sense, but as guides helping each other find their way. They disappeared into the lower levels of Coruscant, living among the forgotten and the outcast.
And there they began to learn what it truly meant to serve the Force rather than any faction or philosophy.
Years passed. Sidious, revealed as Senator Palpatine, continued his schemes. He could not risk hunting for Maul and the boy directly, as it would expose him, so instead he accelerated his plans for galactic domination. The Clone Wars began right on schedule. Though without Anakin Skywalker to corrupt, Sidious had to make do with other pawns. Count Dooku became his public apprentice, leading the Separatists. General Grievous commanded the droid armies. And in the shadows, Sidious plotted the destruction of the Jedi, the proclamation of the Empire, and the complete domination of the galaxy. But he had not counted on the Chosen One working against him. The schism, breaking from Sidious as the Clone Wars raged across the galaxy, Maul and Anakin worked in secret to undermine both sides of the conflict. They had spent years in hiding, with Maul teaching Anakin not the rigid doctrines of Jedi or Sith, but a more fluid understanding of the Force. The boy learned to draw on emotion without being controlled by it, to use power without being corrupted by it, to walk the razor's edge between light and dark. By the time Anakin was 16, he had become something the galaxy had never seen. A true gray Jedi, though even that term did not quite capture what he was. He could heal with the Force as skillfully as any Jedi Master, yet he could also fight with a ferocity that would shame most Sith. His lightsaber blazed blue, but he fought with forms that blended all 7 styles into something uniquely his own. Maul, for his part, had undergone his own transformation. The tattooed Sabrak, who had once been Sidious's perfect weapon, now understood that his purpose was not destruction, but restoration. Not the restoration of the old Jedi Order or the triumph of the Sith, but the restoration of balance to a force that had been warped by millennia of conflict between artificial extremes. Together they operated in the shadows of the Clone Wars, saving lives where they could, preventing atrocities on both sides, and slowly gathering others who had fallen through the cracks of the galactic conflict. Deserter clones who refused to be mere cannon fodder, Jedi who questioned the Council's increasingly militant stance, separatists who realized their movement had been hijacked by those with darker motives. All of them found refuge in the network Maul and Anakin had built. They called themselves the Veil Walkers, those who moved between the shadows and the light. Their symbol was a lightsaber divided into 3 colors, red, blue, and gray, representing the synthesis of opposing forces. They had no grand temple or official recognition, just a shared commitment to ending the war and exposing those who profited from it. Their investigation into the war's true architects led them inevitably to Sidious. Through years of careful intelligence gathering, Maul pieced together the truth he had suspected since his break with his former master. The Sith Lord was manipulating both sides, playing the Republic and Separatists against each other to accumulate power. More disturbing was the evidence they uncovered of Order 66, a contingency protocol hidden in the clone troopers' behavior modification chips that would turn them against the Jedi at a single command. Maul knew they had to act, but the challenge was overwhelming. How could they expose Sidious without proof that would convince the Jedi Council? How could they prevent Order 66 when the clone army numbered in the millions, and they had resources enough only to help a few dozen at a time? The answer came from an unexpected source. During a mission to rescue Jedi younglings from a separatist attack, they encountered Ahsoka Tano, Padawan to a Jedi Master named Plo Koon. In our timeline, Ahsoka would have been Anakin's apprentice, but without Anakin in the Jedi Order, she had been assigned elsewhere. She was clever, brave, and most importantly, she possessed the rare ability to question authority when her instincts told her something was wrong. Maul sensed something special in her immediately. Her connection to the Force was strong, and unlike many of her fellow Jedi, she did not view the galaxy in simple terms of light and dark. When he and Anakin saved her from a battalion of battle droids, she did not immediately attack them despite sensing Maul's dark side training. Instead, she listened. Over the weeks that followed, Ahsoka became their link to the Jedi Order. She carried messages, gathered intelligence, and slowly, carefully began to plant seeds of doubt about the war's true nature among those Jedi who would listen. Masters like Plo Koon and Shak Ti, who had always been more open-minded than the Council's hardliners, began to investigate on their own. But Sidious was not idle. He sensed the growing threat to his plans and moved to accelerate the endgame. He orchestrated increasingly desperate battles, pushing both sides toward mutual destruction. He manipulated Dooku and Grievous into taking actions that would force the Jedi deeper into their role as generals rather than peacekeepers. And he began to whisper in the minds of the clone commanders, preparing them for the moment when Order 66 would be given. The breaking point came during the Battle of Coruscant, when Sidious revealed his hand by allowing himself to be captured by General Grievous as part of his plan to consolidate power. Maul knew this was the moment they had been preparing for. Sidious was vulnerable, separated from his power base, relying on the Jedi to rescue him, while he maneuvered them into position for the final betrayal. Maul and Anakin, along with a small team of Veil Walkers and sympathetic Jedi, infiltrated Grievous's flagship during the chaos of the space battle. Their mission was twofold: expose Sidious as the Sith Lord before he could spring his trap, and disable the transmitter that would broadcast Order 66 to the clone army. The infiltration went according to plan until they reached the chamber where Sidious was being held prisoner. There they found not a helpless captive, but a Sith Lord who had been expecting them. Dooku stood at his side, and arrayed around the room were a dozen of Grievous's most elite Magna Guards, their electrostaffs humming with lethal energy. "Lord Maul," Sidious said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "How predictable. You could not resist trying to play the hero, could you? And you brought young Skywalker with you. How touching." Maul ignited his lightsaber, its crimson blades casting stark shadows across the chamber. Beside him, Anakin activated his own weapon, the blue blade, a sharp contrast. Behind them, their small team took defensive positions. "It is over, Sidious," Maul declared. "The Jedi know the truth." "The Republic knows what you are. Your schemes have failed." Sidious laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The Jedi know nothing. The Republic believes what I tell them to believe. And you, my former apprentice, are about to discover what it means to challenge a true master of the dark side." What followed was not so much a battle as a massacre. Sidious unleashed power that Maul had never witnessed during his training. Dark side energy so concentrated it seemed to warp reality itself. The Magna Guards fell upon the Veil Walkers with mechanical precision. Dooku engaged the sympathetic Jedi with elegant brutality. And Sidious himself focused his attention on Maul and Anakin. The two chosen ones, for that is what they both were in this timeline, fought as one being. Anakin's blue blade and Maul's crimson saber staff moved in perfect coordination, creating a wall of light and shadow that held back Sidious's onslaught. They drew on the Force in ways the Sith Lord had never imagined, each drawing strength from the other, their connection allowing them to anticipate attacks that should have been impossible to predict. But it was not enough. Sidious had spent decades preparing for this confrontation, had studied every form and technique, had delved into Sith secrets that predated the rule of two. He was not merely powerful, he was the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning. Lightning arced from his fingers, forcing Maul and Anakin apart. He telekinetically hurled debris at them, breaking their rhythm, and all the while he taunted them, seeking to break their concentration with words as sharp as any blade. "You think you have transcended light and dark?" he mocked. "You think you have found some mythical balance? There is no balance. There is only power and those strong enough to wield it." Anakin, younger and less experienced, began to falter under the assault. A bolt of lightning caught him in the shoulder, and he cried out in pain, his lightsaber falling from nerveless fingers. Maul moved to protect him, but in doing so, he left himself open to Dooku's attack. The Count's crimson blade pierced Maul's side, a perfect strike that should have been fatal. Maul staggered, his own lightsaber falling from his hands, blood staining his robes. He collapsed to one knee, his vision blurring, his connection to the Force flickering like a candle in a storm. Sidious approached him slowly, savoring the moment. "You were my greatest creation," he said softly, "the chosen one itself, molded to serve the dark side. And you threw it all away for sentiment, for weakness. Now you will die, and the prophecy will die with you." Maul looked up at his former master, blood trickling from his mouth, and he smiled. "I am not the only chosen one here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Force does not give up so easily." Anakin, wounded and afraid, felt something stir within him at those words. He looked at Maul, the Zabrak who had saved him from slavery, who had taught him that the Force was not black and white, but infinite shades of gray, and he understood what he had to do. Drawing on reserves of power he did not know he possessed, Anakin reached out with the Force and touched not just Maul, but every living being in the ship. Clone troopers preparing for Order 66, Jedi fighting desperately against impossible odds, even the Separatist droids in their own limited way. He connected them all, wove them together in a web of life and purpose that transcended faction and programming. And through that web he channeled the living Force itself. The effect was cataclysmic. Throughout the ship, clone troopers suddenly stopped receiving orders and started thinking for themselves. Jedi felt their connection to the Force deepen and clarify, burning away the fog of war that had clouded their judgment. Even Dooku, servant of the dark side, felt a moment of clarity and questioned everything he had done. Sidious screamed as the web of light enveloped him, trying to corrupt it, to twist it to his purposes. But this was the work of two chosen ones working in perfect harmony, and even a Sith Lord with his power could not stand against that. The Force itself rejected him, cast him out like an infection being purged from a body. His lightning turned back on himself, his own dark side power consuming him from within. And in the end, he had only a moment to understand that he had lost before the darkness took him. When the light faded, Sidious was gone, his body simply unmade, scattered into the Force as if he had never existed. Dooku stood alone, his lightsaber fallen from nerveless fingers, staring at the space where his master had been. The Magna Guards had collapsed, their programming disrupted by the wave of Force energy, and in the center of it all, Anakin knelt beside Maul, tears streaming down his face. "Stay with me," the boy was saying, his hands pressed against Maul's wound, trying desperately to channel healing energy. "Please, stay with me." Maul looked up at him and smiled. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "We have too much work left to do." The death of Darth Sidious sent shockwaves through the Force that were felt across the galaxy. Every Jedi, from the newest youngling to the ancient Master Yoda, experienced a moment of profound clarity, as if a veil had been lifted from their perception. The darkness that had been clouding their judgment, making them blind to the Chancellor's true nature and complicit in a war neither side could win, simply dissipated. But clarity came too late for some. The death of Sidious triggered his final contingency, a posthumous order transmitted to every clone commander in the Grand Army of the Republic. The behavior modification chips embedded in their brains activated, overriding free will with brutal efficiency. Across thousands of worlds, clone troopers turned their weapons on the Jedi they had fought beside for 3 years. However, this timeline's Order 66 was not the complete massacre it would have been in our reality.
Anakin's act of connecting the living Force through every being on Sidious's flagship had ripple effects that extended far beyond that single ship.
Some clone troopers, those who had been closest to that surge of connection, found their behavior chips damaged or disrupted entirely.
They retained their free will and refused the order, choosing to protect rather than execute their Jedi generals.
Moreover, the Jedi themselves were no longer clouded and complacent.
They felt the betrayal coming seconds before it manifested, giving them crucial time to defend themselves.
The great Jedi purge still happened, and hundreds of Jedi fell to the clones' blaster fire, but hundreds more survived where they would have died. On Coruscant, the Jedi Temple came under siege from Clone Commander Apple, but where Vader would have led the attack in our timeline, here the assault was purely military, with no Sith Lord to tip the scales.
Master Shakti, Plo Koon, and Kit Fisto organized the temple's defense, evacuating younglings through secret passages while buying time with their lives.
Maul and Anakin, recovering aboard the flagship after their confrontation with Sidious, felt the disturbance in the Force the moment Order 66 activated. Maul's wound was grievous, but his Zabrak physiology and his connection to the Force kept him conscious. Together with Ahsoka Tano and the surviving Veil Walkers, they commandeered the flagship and set course for Coruscant at maximum speed. The journey took 4 hours, and in that time they could feel Jedi dying across the galaxy, their lights winking out one by one. It was agonizing, knowing they could not save them all, but Maul used the pain to focus himself.
This was his purpose as the Chosen One.
Not to prevent all suffering, but to ensure that the suffering served a purpose, that balance could be restored from the ashes of destruction. When they reached Coruscant, the temple was burning. The 501st had breached the outer defenses and were fighting their way through the lower levels. Maul, still weak from his injury, nonetheless led the charge into the temple with Anakin at his side. What followed was chaos. The clone troopers, programmed to see all Force users as enemies, turned their weapons on the newcomers. But Maul and Anakin did not kill them. Instead, they used precise strikes to disarm and disable, knowing that these men were victims of Sidious's manipulation as surely as any Jedi. Ahsoka and the Veil Walkers followed their example, turning what should have been a slaughter into a rescue operation. Deep within the temple, they found Master Yoda defending a group of younglings against overwhelming odds. The ancient Grand Master had single-handedly held off 2 full battalions, but even his strength was finite. When Maul and Anakin arrived, Yoda looked at them with eyes that held no judgment, only profound understanding.
"The Chosen One you are," Yoda said to Maul, his voice carrying the weight of 900 years of wisdom.
"Seen it I have, but understood it I did not. From darkness you came. To balance you have brought us all." Maul bowed his head in respect. "Master Yoda, we need to evacuate the temple." "This battle cannot be won here." "Agree I do," Yoda replied. "But leave the younglings unprotected. We cannot. Defend them to the end. The Jedi way is." "Then we change the way," Anakin said firmly. "We protect them by getting them out, not by dying alongside them. The Jedi can serve the galaxy better alive than as martyrs."
For a moment, Yoda studied the young man who, in another timeline, would have destroyed the Jedi Order.
Here he saw only sincerity and determined wisdom.
The ancient master nodded slowly.
"Right, you may be," he conceded. "But trust you, many Jedi will not. A Sith apprentice and a student trained in darkness, you appear to be." Maul felt the sting of those words, but accepted their truth. "Then let those who will follow us follow, and those who will not, we will protect anyway." "We are not seeking to lead the Jedi, Master Yoda, only to save what can be saved." The evacuation of the Jedi Temple was a desperate affair, accomplished through a combination of Force-enhanced speed, strategic sacrifice, and the sheer determination of beings who refused to surrender to despair. By the time the sun rose over Coruscant's urban landscape, 300 Jedi had escaped the temple, ranging from younglings barely old enough to hold a training saber to ancient masters who remembered the temple before it had been renovated 2 centuries ago. But the victory was bittersweet. Thousands of Jedi had died across the galaxy, and those who survived were scattered, hunted, alone. The Republic they had served for a millennium was dying, transforming into something darker with every passing hour. And at the center of it all stood a power vacuum where Sidious had been, a vacuum that would not remain unfilled for long. The years of empire, guerrilla warfare without Sidious to guide the transformation, the Galactic Empire's birth was more chaotic and contested than in our timeline. Maz Ameda, Sidious's vice-chancellor, attempted to claim emergency powers and declare himself emperor, but he lacked the Sith Lord's manipulative genius.
Instead of a smooth transition from Republic to Empire, the galaxy descended into a brutal power struggle.
Various senators, generals, and corporate interests fought for control of the galactic government. Some sectors declared independence entirely. The Clone Wars, rather than ending cleanly, fragmented into dozens of smaller conflicts as warlords carved out their own territories. It was an age of chaos, and in that chaos, Maul saw opportunity. Using the network they had built during the Clone Wars, Maul and Anakin established what they called the Balanced Sanctuaries, hidden bases scattered across the Outer Rim where Force users of all kinds could find refuge and training. These were not Jedi temples or Sith academies, but something fundamentally different. Here, students learned to acknowledge and work with all aspects of the Force, not just light or dark, but the infinite spectrum between. The philosophy Maul taught was radical by the standards of both Jedi and Sith. He argued that the Force itself was neither good nor evil, light nor dark, but simply energy, potential, and will. It was how one used the Force and for what purpose that determined the morality of their actions, not which side of some artificial divide they drew their power from.
Anger is not evil, he would tell his students, many of them Jedi who had fled Order 66.
It is a response to injustice, to harm. The evil comes when you use that anger to harm the innocent, to dominate others, to feed only your own desires, but used to protect the weak, to fight tyranny, to stand against those who would oppress. That is righteous fury, and it is no less valid than serene compassion. This teaching was deeply controversial among the traditional Jedi. Master Yoda, while respectful of Maul's role in saving the Order, could not fully embrace this philosophy. Many of the older masters left the sanctuaries, choosing to hide individually rather than accept what they saw as dangerous corruption of Jedi principles. But others, particularly the younger Jedi who had experienced the war firsthand, stayed and learned. Ahsoka Tano became one of Maul's most dedicated students and eventually an instructor herself. She embodied the balanced philosophy perhaps better than anyone save Anakin, understanding that rules and codes were tools, not chains, and that true wisdom came from knowing when to follow them and when to break them. As years passed and the galaxy stabilized into a loose confederation of rival powers, the Balanced Sanctuaries became legendary. Rumor spoke of Force-wielding warriors who could heal with one hand and fight with the other, who drew on emotion without being ruled by it, who walked between shadow and light with perfect ease. Some saw them as heroes, others as dangerous radicals, and still others as the natural evolution of Force philosophy beyond the rigid doctrines that had dominated for millennia. But they were not unopposed. From the ashes of Sidious's plan, a new threat emerged. Count Dooku, freed from his master's control but still devoted to Sith ideology, claimed the title of Dark Lord and began rebuilding the Sith Order in his own image. He gathered Darksiders from across the galaxy, those who had operated in secret during the Republic's reign, and trained them in the ways of the dark side.
Dooku saw the Balanced Sanctuaries as an abomination, a perversion of the clear truth that the dark side was superior to the light.
He launched a campaign of assassination and terrorism against them, determined to prove that only through embracing pure darkness could true power be achieved. His followers, calling themselves the Eternal Sith, waged a shadow war against Maul's students that would last for decades. The conflict between the balanced sanctuaries and the eternal Sith defined an entire era of galactic history. Neither side had the numbers or resources for open warfare, so instead they fought through proxies, assassinations, and ideological battles. Worlds aligned themselves with one faction or another based on whether they valued the rigid certainty of Sith doctrine or the flexible wisdom of balanced philosophy. Through it all, Maul remained the beating heart of the balance movement. His double-bladed lightsaber became a symbol recognized across the galaxy, crimson blades that no longer represented pure darkness, but rather the synthesis of all aspects of the Force. He fought when necessary with a ferocity that reminded enemies why he had once been Sidious's chosen weapon, but he also showed mercy, compassion, and wisdom that proved he was something far greater. Anakin, growing from a talented youth into a powerful adult Force user, became Maul's partner rather than his student. Together they formed a dyad in the Force, their connection so deep that they could sense each other across vast distances and coordinate their actions with perfect unity. When Dooku's assassins came for the sanctuaries, it was Anakin and Maul who stood as the first and last line of defense. One of their most significant battles occurred on the ancient Sith world of Korriban, where Dooku had established a dark academy to mirror the balanced sanctuaries. Maul led a strike force of his most skilled students to infiltrate the academy and destroy the Sith holocrons Dooku was using to spread dark side teachings. The mission went wrong when Dooku himself appeared with his most powerful apprentices, turning what should have been a quick strike into a desperate fight for survival. The duel between Maul and Dooku on Korriban became legendary, spoken of in whispers by Force users for generations. They fought across the ancient tombs of the Sith Lords, their lightsabers casting strange shadows across hieroglyphs that predated the Republic. Dooku, a master of the elegant Makashi form, fought with precision and grace, his crimson blade seeking the smallest openings in Maul's defense. Maul, drawing on all 7 forms, plus his own innovations, fought with a ferocity tempered by absolute control. He did not allow rage to rule him, but he did not deny it either. His anger at what the Sith had done to him, to Anakin, to the galaxy itself, fueled his strikes without clouding his judgment, and in the spaces between his attacks he reached out with compassion, trying even in the midst of combat to turn Dooku back from the darkness. "You do not have to do this," Maul said as their blades locked, faces mere inches apart. "Sidious is dead. His hold on you is broken. You could be free." Dooku's expression twisted with contempt. "Free? I was never imprisoned, Maul. I chose this path willingly, understanding that true power comes only through the dark side. Your pathetic attempt at balance is weakness wearing wisdom's mask." "No," Maul replied, his voice soft but unyielding. "My balance is strength acknowledging its limits. Your darkness is fear pretending to be power." The duel intensified, both combatants drawing deeper on the Force. Dooku unleashed lightning, trying to overwhelm Maul with raw dark side energy. But Maul caught it on his blade and redirected it, not back at Dooku, but harmlessly into the stone floor. He would not kill if he could avoid it, even when facing a deadly enemy. This restraint proved to be both Maul's greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Dooku, recognizing that Maul would not strike to kill, began to use it against him. He maneuvered their fight toward where Anakin and the other balanced students were fighting Dooku's apprentices, forcing Maul to divide his attention between the duel and protecting his people. In a moment when Maul was distracted, defending a young student from a Sith's killing blow, Dooku struck. His blade pierced Maul's shoulder, a precise hit that severed tendons and nerves, causing the Zabrak's double-bladed lightsaber to fall from nerveless fingers. Maul collapsed, his wound bleeding freely, pain lancing through his entire body. Dooku stood over him, blade raised for the killing blow. Your balance has failed you, Chosen One. Now you will die, and the Sith will prove their supremacy over your naive philosophy. But before he could strike, Anakin was there, his blue lightsaber catching Dooku's red 1 mere inches from Maul's throat. The young man's face was set with grim determination, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. You will not touch him. I will not let you take away the one person who showed me that the Force is more than your narrow doctrines allow. What followed was a duel that exceeded even the battle between Maul and Dooku. Anakin, trained by the Chosen One himself in the balanced philosophy, fought with a style that transcended traditional forms. He flowed like water, struck like lightning, defended like a mountain, and attacked like a wildfire. Every move was perfect, because he was not trying to be perfect. He was simply being himself, allowing the Force to guide him without trying to control it. Dooku, for all his skill and experience, found himself pushed back. This was not supposed to happen. The boy was barely 30 years old, while Dooku himself had trained for over 8 decades. But Anakin was something Dooku had never encountered before, a Force user who acknowledged and used both light and dark, who drew strength from love and anger equally, who fought to protect rather than to prove. The duel ended when Anakin disarmed Dooku through a brilliant feint, sending the Count's lightsaber clattering across the tomb floor. Dooku fell to his knees, defenseless, waiting for the killing blow. But Anakin deactivated his lightsaber and extended his hand instead. "Come with us," he said simply. "The Sith are finished. Sidious is dead. The philosophy of the dark side has brought you nothing but isolation and violence. But there is another way, if you are brave enough to take it." Dooku stared at the offered hand, his mind reeling. In that moment, something broke within him. The certainty that had sustained him for decades crumbled, and he saw with terrible clarity what he had become. Not a powerful lord or a wise teacher, but a frightened old man clinging to darkness because he could not admit he had been wrong. He took Anakin's hand. The redemption of Count Dooku sent shockwaves through the eternal Sith. Their leader, the Dark Lord who had seemed unshakable in his convictions, had joined the enemy. Some of his followers fled, seeking new masters or abandoning the Sith path entirely. Others hardened their resolve, viewing Dooku's fall as weakness to be excised rather than a sign to reconsider their philosophy. But the balance of power had shifted, with Dooku bringing knowledge of the Eternal Sith's operations and hideouts. Maul and Anakin launched a coordinated campaign to dismantle the organization. It took 5 more years of careful work, negotiation, and yes, combat when necessary, but eventually, the Eternal Sith collapsed. The galaxy entered a new era, one without dominant Force user factions enforcing their will. The balanced sanctuaries grew, evolving from military compounds into true schools where anyone with Force sensitivity could learn to use their gifts wisely. Some students leaned more toward the light, others embraced aspects of darkness, but all learned to see the Force as a unified whole rather than a battleground. The final confrontation balanced through darkness, but the story of Maul as the Chosen One was not finished. For all the changes he had brought, for all the good done by the balanced philosophy, one fundamental imbalance remained. The wound Sidious had carved into the Force itself through millennia of Sith manipulation still festered. Maul could feel it in his meditations, a darkness that went beyond mere evil, a corruption of the Force's very fabric. To truly bring balance, to fulfill the prophecy completely, Maul would have to do what no Force user had ever attempted. He would have to descend into the depths of that corruption and heal it from within. The quest led him to Exegol, an ancient Sith world hidden in the unknown regions. Here, in vast underground chambers carved from living stone, the Sith had performed their darkest rituals for thousands of years. The very air was thick with malevolent energy, and the Force itself seemed to scream in agony in this place. Anakin wanted to accompany him, but Maul refused. "This is something I must do alone," he explained. "The prophecy speaks of the Chosen One bringing balance, not the Chosen Ones, plural. This is my burden, my purpose, my destiny." "Then at least let me stand guard at the entrance," Anakin insisted. "If something goes wrong, if you need me, if I need you, you will know." Maul interrupted gently. "Our connection transcends distance. Trust in the Force, Anakin. Trust in me." Reluctantly, Anakin agreed. He watched as Maul descended into the darkness, double-bladed lightsaber extinguished, walking unarmed into the heart of the Sith's greatest works. Then the Zabrak disappeared from sight, swallowed by shadows that seemed to possess weight and hunger. What Maul experienced in the depths of Exegol could not be fully described in words. The Sith had performed rituals here that bent reality itself, creating pockets where the Force was twisted into shapes nature never intended. Trapped spirits of ancient Sith lords howled in eternal torment, unable to move on to whatever lay beyond death. Living crystals pulsed with condensed hatred, their formations spelling out blasphemies against life itself. And at the very center of it all, in a chamber so deep it seemed to touch the planet's core, Maul found what he had been seeking. A nexus of dark side energy so concentrated it had achieved a kind of sentience, a force of pure malevolence that existed for no purpose except to spread suffering. This was the source, the wound that kept the Force from achieving true balance. Every Sith Lord who had ever lived had drawn power from this place, feeding it with their hatred and ambition in turn, creating a feedback loop of darkness that had sustained the Sith for millennia. To heal the Force, Maul would have to absorb this darkness into himself. All of it, every drop of hatred, every moment of suffering, every thought of domination and cruelty that had pooled in this cursed place for thousands of years. He would have to take it into his being and somehow, impossibly, find a way to transform it into something else. The prophecy spoke of the Chosen One destroying the Sith. Maul finally understood what that truly meant. Not killing individual Sith Lords, though that was part of it, but destroying the very concept of the Sith, the philosophy of pure darkness that had plagued the galaxy for so long. And the only way to destroy it was to prove that even the deepest darkness could be balanced by light. Maul sat in the center of the chamber and opened himself completely to the Force. He did not fight the darkness or try to reject it. Instead, he welcomed it, allowed it to flow into him like water filling a vessel. The pain was indescribable. Every evil deed, every moment of anguish, every life destroyed by Sith ambition crashed through his consciousness simultaneously. He felt himself being crushed under the weight of it, his identity dissolving, the person known as Maul disappearing into an ocean of hatred.
This was how the Sith had always failed when they tried to consume such power.
They had no anchor, no foundation strong enough to withstand it. They drowned in the darkness they sought to master. But Maul had something the Sith never possessed. He had experienced both light and dark, had learned to hold opposing forces in balance within himself. And more importantly, he had connections. To Anakin, to Ahsoka, to every student he had taught, to every life he had saved or touched or changed. Those connections formed a web of light that held him anchored, even as darkness threatened to sweep him away. He drew on every moment of compassion he had ever felt, every instance of sacrifice, every time he had chosen mercy over vengeance. He balanced each fragment of darkness with an equal measure of light, not destroying either, but allowing them to coexist, to neutralize each other's extremes, while preserving their essential natures.
Hours passed, or perhaps days.
Time had no meaning in that place. Maul existed in a state between life and death, between light and dark, between self and void, and slowly, imperceptibly, the balance began to shift. The darkness was still present, but it no longer dominated. It became part of a larger whole, no more significant than the light, both of them aspects of a unified force. The ancient Sith spirits found peace and faded into the beyond. The corrupted crystals cracked and crumbled, their malevolence dissipating, and the nexus of dark energy, that sentient hatred that had fed the Sith for so long, simply dissolved. When Maul finally opened his eyes, the chamber was silent. The oppressive weight that had filled the air was gone. He could feel the force flowing through this place as it was meant to. Neither light nor dark dominating, but existing in perfect, natural balance. But the cost had been high. Maul's body had aged significantly, his skin more scarred and weathered than before. His connection to the Force, while still powerful, felt different now, more stable, more balanced, but also more distant, as if he had stepped back from it rather than being consumed by it. He rose slowly, his movement stiff and painful, and began the long walk back to the surface. When he finally emerged into Exegol's perpetual twilight, he found Anakin waiting exactly where he had promised to be. The young man took one look at Maul and rushed forward, offering his shoulder for support. "Is it done?" Anakin asked quietly. Maul nodded. "The Sith are finished. Not just the individuals, but the very foundation of their philosophy. The wound in the Force has been healed. Balance has been restored." "At what cost?" Anakin's voice was tight with concern as he examined Maul's aged features. "A cost I was willing to pay," Maul replied. "This was my purpose, Anakin, the reason the Force created me, and I do not regret it." Legacy and reflection, the healing of Exegol's corruption, had effects that rippled across the galaxy. Force sensitives everywhere felt a change, a lightening of a burden they had not fully realized they carried. The dark side was still present, still accessible to those who sought it, but it no longer pulled at Force users with the same insidious strength. The natural balance between light and dark had been restored. Maul, his purpose as the chosen one fulfilled, did not retire or seek peace. Instead, he threw himself into the work of rebuilding, using the years remaining to him to establish the balanced sanctuaries as permanent institutions. By the time he was 60, there were 100 such sanctuaries scattered across known space, each one teaching a new generation of Force users to embrace complexity rather than certainty, balance rather than extremism. The galaxy he left behind was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before Sidious's rise. The strict dichotomy between Jedi and Sith had dissolved, replaced by a spectrum of Force philosophies that acknowledged the validity of different approaches. Some Force users still leaned heavily toward the light, dedicating themselves to healing and protection. Others embraced aspects of darkness, channeling their passion and intensity into pursuits like art, justice, or defending the weak. But all of them understood the fundamental truth that Maul had proven with his life. The Force was neither light nor dark, but both and neither, and something far greater. It was a tool, a gift, a responsibility, and how one used it determined their character far more than which side of an arbitrary divide they drew their power from. Anakin Skywalker succeeded Maul as the head of the Balanced Sanctuaries when the old Zabrak finally passed away at the age of 73. The cause of death was simply exhaustion, his body finally giving out after decades of channeling forces that would have destroyed a lesser being. He died surrounded by friends, students, and the chosen one he had saved from slavery so many years ago. His last words were simple: "The Force is balance. Never forget." The funeral was attended by thousands, Force users from every philosophy and faction coming together to honor the being who had changed galactic history. Even former enemies came to pay their respects, acknowledging that while they had disagreed with Maul's methods, they could not deny his profound impact on the galaxy. Master Yoda, ancient beyond measure, and one of the few beings who had known Maul since the beginning of his mission, delivered the eulogy.
He spoke of a prophecy that had been misunderstood for millennia, interpreted through the lens of Jedi certainty rather than the Force's true will.
He acknowledged that the Jedi had been wrong to believe the Chosen One would emerge from the light to destroy the dark. From darkness itself the Chosen One came, Yoda said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly, and in embracing both light and dark, balance he achieved. Humility, this teaches us. Trust in the Force we must, but trust our understanding of it we should not. Greater than our philosophies, the Force is. Wiser than our certainties. And through Maul, its will was done. In the years that followed, Maul became a legend, his story told and retold until it was difficult to separate fact from embellishment. Some versions painted him as a fallen Sith who found redemption. Others portrayed him as a great Jedi who transcended the limitations of both Order and Sith. Still others suggested he was a new kind of Force user entirely, one who existed outside traditional categories. The truth, as always, was more complex than any simple narrative could capture. Maul had been all of these things and none of them. He had been a child stolen from his mother, a weapon forged in darkness, a warrior who chose mercy when he could have chosen death, and a teacher who showed others that the Force was not a battleground but a harmony. Most importantly, he had been the Chosen One, fulfilling a prophecy in ways no one had anticipated. He had brought balance not by destroying evil or empowering good, but by showing that both were necessary aspects of existence, that the Force itself embraced contradiction and complexity rather than rejecting it. His influence extended far beyond Force philosophy. The political landscape of the galaxy had been shaped by his actions. Without the Empire's authoritarian grip, planetary systems developed their own unique governmental structures, creating a diverse tapestry of political experiments. Some succeeded brilliantly, others failed spectacularly, but all of them taught lessons that helped the galaxy mature beyond the monolithic republic or empire. The Balanced Sanctuaries became centers of learning that rivaled the ancient Jedi Temple in reputation, if not in size. Students came from across the galaxy to study not just Force techniques, but philosophy, ethics, conflict resolution, and the practical applications of wisdom in daily life. Graduates of the sanctuaries were sought after as mediators, counselors, and advisors, their reputation for balanced judgment making them invaluable in a galaxy still learning to navigate without the old certainties. Ahsoka Tano, who had learned at Maul's feet and eventually became one of the greatest teachers in the sanctuary's history, perhaps best summed up his legacy. In her memoirs, written when she was in her 80s, she reflected on what Maul had taught her and countless others. Maul showed us that we are not defined by where we come from, but by the choices we make.
He showed us that darkness is not the enemy, but ignorance is.
That hatred can be transformed into passion for justice, that anger can become fuel for protecting the weak, that even the deepest wounds can be healed if we are brave enough to face them. He was the chosen one not because he was perfect, but because he was perfectly willing to embrace imperfection in service of something greater. We carry his lesson forward: balance in all things, compassion without weakness, strength without cruelty, and always, always the courage to question certainty. As decades turned to centuries, the galaxy settled into a new equilibrium. Force users still existed, still played important roles in galactic affairs, but they were no longer divided into rigid factions locked in eternal conflict. The Sith were truly extinct, not because they had been killed off, but because their philosophy had been rendered obsolete.
Why embrace pure darkness when you could access all the Force's power without sacrificing your humanity?
The Jedi Order reformed, but in a radically different form. No longer claiming to be the sole guardians of the light side or the arbiters of how the Force should be used, they became one philosophical school among many. They preserved important traditions and knowledge, but they also acknowledged their past mistakes, particularly their role in enabling Sidious's rise by being too rigid and dogmatic. New Force traditions emerged, some drawing on ancient practices that predated the Jedi-Sith conflict, others inventing entirely novel approaches. The galaxy became a laboratory for exploring what the Force could be when freed from the artificial constraints of light versus dark. And through it all, Maul's legacy endured. His double-bladed lightsaber, now a museum piece preserved in the first balanced sanctuary he established, stood as a reminder that even tools associated with darkness could serve balance. His teachings, compiled by Anakin and Ahsoka into texts that were copied and distributed across the galaxy, provided guidance for generations of Force users seeking to walk the narrow path between extremes. Perhaps most importantly, his life proved that prophecy was not a cage but a call to action. Yes, he had been the chosen one, created by the Force for a specific purpose. But he had also been Maul, an individual who made choices, felt emotions, loved and hated and struggled and grew. The prophecy had given him a purpose, but he had decided how to fulfill it. In the end, that choice, that agency, that willingness to forge his own path was what had made all the difference. Conclusion and call to action. And so we come to the end of this alternate timeline, this exploration of what might have been if the Force had chosen a different vessel for its will. In our reality, Anakin Skywalker was the chosen one, and he fulfilled the prophecy through decades of darkness, followed by a single moment of redemption. It was a powerful story, one that taught us that it is never too late to choose the light. But in this reality, Maul was the chosen one, and he fulfilled the prophecy by refusing to choose between light and dark at all. Instead, he embraced both, proving that true balance comes not from eliminating one side of a dualism, but from acknowledging that both sides are necessary parts of a greater whole. It was an equally powerful story, one that teaches us that wisdom lies not in certainty, but in the courage to hold contradictions in our hearts. Both timelines, both chosen ones, both stories are true in their own way. They remind us that the Force, like reality itself, is vast enough to contain multiple truths, complex enough to defy simple categorization, and profound enough to work through the most unexpected vessels. Maul, the weapon forged in darkness, became the teacher of balance. The Sith apprentice destined to destroy the Jedi instead saved them by showing them a better way. The child stolen from his mother became a father figure to thousands. The being created to serve evil chose to serve the Force itself in all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror. That is the power of choice. That is the promise of the Chosen One. Not that fate controls us, but that we control how we respond to fate. Not that we are prisoners of our nature, but that we define our nature through our actions. Not that darkness must consume us, or that light must restrict us, but that we can dance between both, drawing strength from each while being mastered by neither. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you will dream of that other galaxy, the one where tattooed Zabrak with burning eyes taught the universe what balance truly means. Perhaps you will see the crimson blades of his lightsaber not as symbols of darkness, but as reminders that even from the deepest shadows, light can emerge. Perhaps you will feel the Force flowing through all things, light and dark together, creating a harmony more beautiful than either could achieve alone. And perhaps in your own life you will remember Maul's lesson, that you are not defined by where you start, but by where you choose to go. That your past does not have to determine your future. That the darkness within you can be transformed into strength, and the light within you can be tempered by wisdom. That balance, true balance, comes not from denying parts of yourself, but from acknowledging all of them and choosing consciously which parts to feed, which to starve, and which to simply accept as part of the complicated, contradictory, beautiful mess that is existence. Thank you for joining me on this journey through an alternate Star Wars timeline. If you enjoyed exploring what might have been, if Darth Maul was the chosen one, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We have many more deep dives into Sith lore, alternative timelines, and explorations of the darker corners of the Star Wars galaxy planned for the future. May the Force, in all its complexity and contradiction, be with you, and may you find your own balance between the shadows and the light. Good night.